My name is Jordan Wells. I'm 32 years old, and 4 days ago, I discovered that my business partner and best friend had been systematically copying everything we built together and creating an identical competing company behind my back for the past 8 months. Everything I thought I knew about trust, friendship, and partnership just imploded. And I'm still trying to figure out how I missed it. How someone I trusted completely could betray me so thoroughly while looking me in the eye every single day. Let me start from the beginning because this whole thing is so calculated, so deliberate, that you need the full context to understand how completely I was played. 2 years ago, I had an idea for a SaaS product. Nothing revolutionary, but a real gap in the market. A project management tool specifically designed for creative agencies. Most PM software is built for tech companies or generic business use, but creative agencies have different workflows, different needs. I'd worked at an agency for 5 years and seen firsthand how existing tools just didn't fit. I mentioned the idea to my friend Kevin Marsh at a barbecue. We'd known each other since college, both studied computer science, had stayed close over the years. Kevin had been working as a freelance developer, doing contract work, building websites and apps for various clients. He was talented, I was talented, and when I pitched the idea, his eyes lit up. He said we should build it together. He'd handle the front end and design. I'd handle the back end and infrastructure. We'd split everything 50-50, equal partners in every way. I was thrilled. Starting a company alone is scary and lonely. Having a partner, especially one I'd known for over a decade, felt like the perfect setup. We shook hands that day and agreed to make it happen. We spent the next 3 months planning. Nights and weekends, meeting at coffee shops and co-working spaces, sketching out features, mapping user flows, arguing about tech stacks and design philosophies. It was exciting. It felt like we were building something real. We officially incorporated 13 months ago, filed the paperwork, opened a business bank account, set up our development environment. We called the company Streamline Creative, put both our names on everything, 50-50 ownership, just like we'd agreed. Neither of us could quit our day jobs yet, so we worked nights and weekends. Kevin would come to my apartment 3 or 4 times a week. We'd order food, blast music, and code until 2 or 3 in the morning. On weekends, we'd meet at his place or a co-working space and put in 8, 10, 12-hour days. It was brutal, but exhilarating. We were making real progress. The product was taking shape. We built the core functionality, then started adding features, user authentication, team collaboration tools, timeline visualization, resource allocation, client communication features, everything we'd envisioned. Kevin was good, really good. His design sense was better than mine, and his front-end code was clean and elegant. We worked well together. I'd build an API endpoint. He'd build the interface for it. I'd suggest a feature. He'd think of ways to make it more intuitive. He'd have an idea. I'd figure out the technical implementation. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. About 5 months in, we started showing the product to people. Friends who ran agencies, former colleagues, people we knew in the industry. The feedback was incredible. People loved it. Said it solved problems they'd been dealing with for years. Asked when they could start using it. We decided to do a beta launch. Spent 2 months polishing, fixing bugs, adding the features our beta testers requested. Kevin handled all the design updates and front-end improvements. I worked on back-end optimization and making sure the infrastructure could scale. We launched the beta 8 months ago. Got 50 companies signed up in the first month. Small agencies mostly, but real paying customers. Not much money yet. We were charging cheap beta pricing, but it was validation. Proof that we'd built something people wanted. That's when things started getting weird. Kevin started being less available. He'd cancel our work sessions last minute, saying he had a client project that came up. Or he was sick. Or he had family stuff to deal with. At first, I didn't think much of it. We both had day jobs and freelance work. Life happens. But it kept happening. More and more frequently. We'd have a Monday meeting planned to discuss the week's priorities, and he'd text an hour before saying he couldn't make it. We'd schedule a coding session for Saturday, and Friday night he'd say something came up. When we did meet, he seemed distracted. He'd check his phone constantly, take calls and step outside, say he needed to handle something quick, and disappear for 30 minutes. I asked if everything was okay. He said, yeah, just busy with client work. Said he was trying to save up money so he could eventually go full-time on Streamline. I understood that. I was doing the same thing, taking extra freelance projects to build up savings. Around the same time, I noticed Kevin was asking a lot of questions about the back end, stuff he'd never cared about before. He was a front-end guy. He built the interfaces. I built the engines that powered them. That was our division of labor. But suddenly he wanted to know about the database schema, about how I'd structured the API, about the authentication system and how the data was stored and encrypted, about the deployment process and the server architecture. I thought he was just trying to understand the product better, trying to be a better technical partner. So I explained everything, walked him through the entire back-end architecture, showed him the code, the database diagrams, the infrastructure setup. I was proud of what I'd built, happy to share it. I even gave him access to everything. We used GitHub for version control, and I made sure he had admin access to the repositories. Made sure he could see every line of code, every commit, every decision I'd made. Why wouldn't I? We were partners, 50-50. What's mine is yours, right? 3 months ago, Kevin suggested we pivot slightly. He said he'd been talking to some agency owners and they wanted more robust client communication features. Said we should focus on that for the next few months. Really beef it up. Make it the standout feature of our product. It made sense. Client communication was always a pain point for agencies, so we shifted priorities. I spent the next 2 months building out an entire client portal system. Secure messaging, file sharing, approval workflows, feedback collection, everything an agency would need to communicate with their clients within our platform. Kevin built the front end for it. It looked beautiful. We launched it to our beta users 6 weeks ago, and the response was incredible. People said it was a game changer. I was so proud. We were so close to being ready for a full launch. Just a few more features, a little more polish, and we'd be ready to really push for growth. Kevin had been less available than ever during those 2 months, but I didn't push it. Figured he was busy, had other commitments. He'd still show up for our Monday meetings, still reviewed my pull requests, still contributed his front-end work. It was slower than before, but we were still making progress. Then, 4 days ago, everything fell apart. I was at a networking event for tech entrepreneurs, mostly startup founders, some investors, some service providers. I was there to network, maybe find some early customers, get advice from people further along than me. I was talking to a guy named Marcus, who ran a small venture fund. He asked what I was working on. I gave him my pitch, project management tool for creative agencies currently in beta, about to launch fully. His face got this weird expression. He asked what the company was called. I told him Streamline Creative. He said, huh, that's funny. He just looked at a pitch deck last week for a company with an almost identical concept, but it wasn't called Streamline Creative. I asked what it was called. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through his emails, showed me. The company was called Agency Flow. The pitch deck was professional, detailed, impressive. And as I scrolled through it, my blood ran cold. It was our product. Not similar. Not inspired by. Identical. The exact same features. The exact same user interface mock-ups. The exact same market positioning. Even some of the same language I'd written for our landing page. But the founder listed on the deck wasn't me and Kevin. It was just Kevin. Kevin Marsh, CEO and founder of Agency Flow. I must have looked like I was going to pass out, because Marcus asked if I was okay. I asked when he'd received this deck. He checked his email. 8 days ago. It had come through a mutual connection who thought Marcus's fund might be interested in investing. I asked if I could forward the deck to myself. He said, sure, send it to my email right there. I left the event immediately, sat in my car in the parking lot, and went through the entire deck. Every slide made it worse. Agency Flow had apparently been in development for 6 months. It had all the features Streamline Creative had, but it also had features we'd discussed but hadn't built yet. Features that were on our roadmap. Kevin had clearly taken our entire product vision and was executing it on his own. The deck mentioned that Agency Flow was currently in stealth mode, but would be launching publicly in 4 weeks. It talked about the founding team, Kevin as CEO, plus 3 other people I'd never heard of, 2 developers and a designer. There were screenshots in the deck. I zoomed in on them. The interface looked exactly like what Kevin had been building for Streamline. The same color scheme, the same layout, the same icons and buttons and navigation. But the code had to be different, right? He couldn't have just copied our code. That would be theft. That would be illegal. I drove home, opened my laptop, and started digging. First, I checked our GitHub repositories, looked at the access logs. Kevin had been accessing the repos regularly as expected, but I noticed something weird. He'd been cloning the repositories, downloading entire copies of the code to his local machine, multiple times over the past few months. That wasn't unusual by itself. Developers clone repos to work on them locally. But the frequency was weird, and the timing correlated with his absences. Every time he'd canceled a work session, he'd cloned the repo either that day or the day after. Then I checked something I'd never thought to check before. Our back-end server logs, every API call, every database query, every action taken by users of our system. There was unusual activity. API calls being made from IP addresses I didn't recognize. Someone had been accessing our system, pulling data, testing features, but not from any of our beta users' locations. I traced one of the IP addresses. It belonged to a cloud service provider. Someone had been running automated tests against our system, systematically checking every feature, every endpoint, every piece of functionality. They were reverse engineering our product, and I had a sinking feeling I knew who. I called Kevin. It was 11 p.m., but I didn't care. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding sleepy, asked what was up. I asked him what Agency Flow was. Long silence. Then he asked where I'd heard that name. I told him I'd seen his pitch deck, told him I knew he'd been building a competing company, asked him to explain. He said we should talk in person. I told him, no, we should talk right now. Another silence. Then he said, okay, fine. Yes, he'd been working on Agency Flow, but it wasn't what I thought. It wasn't competing with Streamline. It was just a side project, something he was exploring. I asked him if he was fucking kidding me. A side project that was identical to our product? A side project he'd pitched to investors as his own company? He said it wasn't identical. It was similar but different. There were features in Agency Flow that Streamline didn't have. I pointed out that those were features we'd discussed building for Streamline, features on our roadmap. He said ideas aren't proprietary. Just because we'd talked about features didn't mean he couldn't build them elsewhere. I asked about the code, asked if he'd copied our code base. He got defensive, said he'd written his own code, said he had every right to build whatever he wanted on his own time. I asked about the design, about the interface that looked exactly like what he'd built for Streamline. He said he'd built that interface. It was his work. He could reuse his own work however he wanted. I asked about the 50-50 partnership we'd agreed to, about the company we'd incorporated together, about the year of nights and weekends we'd spent building Streamline together. He said Streamline was going nowhere. We had 50 beta users and barely any revenue. We were moving too slow. He'd gotten frustrated and decided to take the concept and do it right. Do it right. Like everything we'd built together wasn't good enough. Like the product I'd poured my heart and soul into for a year wasn't worth anything. I asked when he'd started Agency Flow. He said about 8 months ago. 8 months. 2/3 of our entire partnership. He'd been actively building a competing company for 2/3 of the time we'd been working together. I asked if the other people on his team knew about Streamline, if they knew he had a partner and an existing company. He said they knew he'd worked on something similar before, but Agency Flow was different, better, more focused. I asked how it was better when it was literally the exact same product. He said the execution was better, the team was better, the strategy was better. He'd learned from the mistakes we'd made with Streamline and was doing it right this time. Mistakes we'd made. Like I'd done something wrong. Like I was the problem. I told him he'd stolen our product. Stolen our idea, our design, our feature set. Probably our code, even if he claimed otherwise. I told him that was betrayal. That was theft. That was illegal. He said I could try to prove it. Good luck with that. Ideas aren't copyrightable. The design was his work, and he'd written his own code from scratch, so there was nothing I could do about it. Then he said something that made my blood boil. He said I should be grateful. If Agency Flow succeeded, it would validate the market for our product. It would prove that project management tools for creative agencies were viable. That would only help Streamline. Help Streamline. The company he'd been secretly undermining for 8 months while pretending to be my partner. I told him we were done. Partnership over. I wanted him off all the accounts, out of all the systems, removed from the business completely. He said fine. But he kept his shares. We'd incorporated as equal partners, so legally he owned 50% of Streamline Creative whether I liked it or not. I told him I'd talk to a lawyer about that. He said go ahead. But it wouldn't change anything. We'd signed the incorporation papers. We'd filed them with the state. He was a 50% owner of a company worth basically nothing, while he built a real company that would actually succeed. Then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, shaking with rage and disbelief. The next morning, I called a startup lawyer my friend had recommended. Explained the situation. She listened to everything, asked detailed questions, then gave me news I didn't want to hear. Kevin was probably right. Unless I could prove he'd stolen actual code or proprietary information, there wasn't much I could do about him building a competing company, especially since he'd done it on his own time with his own resources. The design was trickier. If he'd created the designs while working for Streamline, they technically belonged to the company. But proving that would be hard. And even if I could prove it, the damages would be minimal. We weren't making much money. I couldn't prove significant financial harm. The 50-50 ownership was the real problem. We'd incorporated without a vesting schedule, without any kind of protection against someone walking away. So yes, Kevin owned 50% of Streamline Creative. And there wasn't much I could do about that without his agreement. The lawyer asked if we had any kind of non-compete agreement. We didn't. Asked if we had anything in writing about intellectual property ownership. We didn't. Asked if we had a partnership agreement that went beyond the basic incorporation documents. We didn't. We'd built everything on trust and handshake agreements like idiots. She said my best option was probably to try to negotiate a buyout, offer Kevin some amount of money to sign over his shares and walk away completely. But given that he was building a competing company, he probably wouldn't be motivated to do that. I asked what would happen if Agency Flow succeeded while still owning 50% of Streamline. She said that was ethically messy, but not necessarily illegal. He could potentially own half of 2 competing companies. Unless... She paused. Unless I could prove he'd used Streamline's resources, connections, or information to build Agency Flow. If he'd used company time, company money, company relationships. That would be a breach of fiduciary duty. That would give me a case. I spent the next 2 days going through everything. Every email, every calendar entry, every expense report, every commit in our repositories, every conversation I could remember. And I found things. Kevin had used the Streamline Company credit card to pay for cloud services. At the time, he'd said it was for testing and development. Now I realized it was probably for agency flow. He'd scheduled meetings with potential customers using the Streamline calendar, then canceled them at the last minute. I'd assumed they were cancellations. Now I wondered if he'd met with them anyway and pitched agency flow instead. He'd accessed our user data, our beta customers' information, their usage patterns, their feedback, all of which would be incredibly valuable for understanding what to build in a competing product. He'd cloned our code base repeatedly. Even if he'd rewritten it from scratch for agency flow, he'd clearly used our code as a reference, as a blueprint, and the timeline. The timeline was damning. Agency flow was announced 6 months into development, which meant Kevin had started it just 2 months after we'd launched our beta. Right when we were getting real user feedback and traction. He'd waited just long enough to validate the market, then jumped ship to do it on his own. I compiled everything and sent it to the lawyer. She reviewed it and said I had a case. Not a slam dunk, but enough to make Kevin's life difficult. Enough to potentially void his ownership stake or force him to pay damages. She drafted a letter, sent it to Kevin yesterday morning. It outlined the evidence of his breach of fiduciary duty, his misuse of company resources, his theft of company information. It demanded that he either sign over his shares for a nominal fee and sign a non-compete agreement, or we'd file a lawsuit. Kevin responded through his own lawyer this afternoon. The response was aggressive, dismissive, and infuriating. His lawyer claimed everything Kevin had done was within his rights as a co-owner, that he'd paid back any company expenses that weren't related to Streamline, that he'd only accessed user data for legitimate Streamline business purposes, that he'd written agency flow from scratch without using any Streamline code. They denied everything, and they threatened to countersue for harassment and defamation if I pursued legal action. My lawyer says we should file anyway, that Kevin's response is defensive and overcompensating, which suggests he knows he's in the wrong, but litigation will be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Even if I win, I might not win enough to make it worth the cost. So now I'm sitting here trying to figure out what to do. Option 1, I fight. I file the lawsuit. I try to prove that Kevin breached his duties as a partner and stole from the company. It'll cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, take months or years to resolve, and distract me from actually building Streamline. But maybe I'd win. Maybe I'd get his shares back. Maybe I'd get some satisfaction. Option 2, I walk away. I let Kevin keep his 50% of basically nothing. I shut down Streamline and move on with my life. Start something new, somewhere Kevin can't touch. Cut my losses and consider it an expensive lesson in choosing better partners. Option 3, I keep building Streamline. I work around Kevin's ownership. I make the product so successful that his 50% is worth something, even if that sticks in my throat. I prove that I can succeed even when someone tries to sabotage me. I don't know which option is right. They all feel terrible in different ways, but here's what I do know. I trusted Kevin completely. Trusted him with my idea, my time, my work, my future. And he repaid that trust by systematically stealing everything we built together and trying to beat me to market with my own product. That betrayal hurts more than any business failure could. More than losing money or wasting time. Because it wasn't just business. Kevin was my friend, had been my friend for over a decade, and he threw all of that away to screw me over. I keep asking myself if I missed signs, if there were red flags I ignored, and yeah, there were. The mysterious client projects that kept him busy, the sudden interest in back-end architecture, the pivot to features that were easier to copy, the gradual ghosting over the past few months. But I'd rationalized all of it, given him the benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do for friends. For partners, you trust them, you assume the best. Kevin exploited that trust. He used my faith in him as a weapon against me. I talked to Marcus, my friend who'd connected me with the lawyer. He said something that's been rattling around in my head. He said some people see partnership as collaboration, and some people see it as competition. Kevin clearly saw it as competition, him versus me, even though we were supposed to be on the same team. Marcus said I needed to learn to spot those people earlier, to protect myself better, to not be so trusting. But I don't want to become cynical. Don't want to start every partnership assuming the worst. That's no way to build anything meaningful. So where does that leave me? Sitting in this coffee shop at 6 a.m., trying to figure out what to do with the wreckage of a year of work and a decade of friendship. I think I'm going to keep building Streamline. Not because I think I can win against Agency Flow. They've got a head start now. They've got a full team. They've got Kevin's undivided attention. But because I'm not going to let Kevin's betrayal destroy something I believe in. Our beta users love the product. They're asking when the full version will launch. They don't care about the drama. They just want a tool that solves their problems. So I'll build it for them. I'll find new partners, real partners, ones who actually value collaboration. I'll restructure the company to protect against this ever happening again. I'll learn from this disaster and come out stronger. And maybe Agency Flow will succeed. Maybe Kevin will raise funding and hire a big team and launch to great fanfare. Maybe he'll make millions off the idea we developed together, but he'll know he stole it. He'll know he betrayed someone who trusted him. He'll know that every dollar he makes is tainted by that betrayal. And I'll know I didn't quit. I'll know I kept building even when someone tried to destroy what I created. I'll know I stayed true to my values even when someone I trusted didn't. That has to count for something. The coffee shop is starting to fill up with the morning crowd. People ordering lattes and settling in with their laptops. Some of them are probably working on their own startups, chasing their own dreams. I wonder how many of them have been betrayed by a partner. How many have had someone steal their idea, their work, their trust? How many are sitting here at 6 a.m. trying to figure out how to keep going? Building something is hard enough without dealing with betrayal. But I guess that's part of the startup world. Trust is currency, and some people are willing to counterfeit it for personal gain. I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to keep trusting, keep collaborating, keep building. But I'm going to be smarter about it. More careful, more protected. Kevin taught me an expensive lesson. I just hope it's worth what it cost. My laptop is open in front of me. The Streamline codebase, a year of work, thousands of hours of nights and weekends. I built something real here, something valuable, something that solves actual problems for actual people. Kevin can copy the features. He can steal the design. He can recreate the functionality, but he can't steal what it took to build it. The late nights, the problem solving, the creativity, the determination. That was all mine. That's all still mine. And I'm going to use it to build something even better. Agency Flow might launch first, might get funding first, might grow faster, but Streamline will be built on truth, on real partnerships, on actual trust. And in the end, I have to believe that matters. I have to believe that betrayal has a cost, that shortcuts come back to haunt you, that stealing someone's work doesn't give you their ability to create. Kevin's a good developer, but he's not a good person. And I'm learning that in business, in life, in everything that matters. Character counts more than skill. So I'm going to keep building, keep trusting, but more carefully, keep partnering, but more wisely. And someday when Streamline succeeds, because I'm going to make damn sure it does, I'll know I did it the right way. Without stealing, without betrayal, without sacrificing friendships for profit. That's the company I want to build. Not just a successful product, but a successful company built on values that matter. Kevin can have agency flow. I'll build something better. Starting now.